Welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Translation Studies and Training, SOTST. Master of Arts, Translation Studies, Maths, English. First year, MTT 011 Translation, History and Tradition. Block 2 Translation of Buddhist Texts into Chinese and Native Indian Languages. Unit 6 Translations of Buddhist Texts into Eastern Languages. 6.0 Objectives. This unit deals with translation of Buddhist texts. Reading this unit will give learners of M.A. in Translation Studies to get an overview of the tradition of translation of Buddhist texts into Eastern languages. In the previous unit you learned about various aspects of the tradition of translation of Buddhist scriptures into Chinese. After reading this unit you will be able to know that what has been the importance of translation in the ancient Asian context? What has been the status of translation work in Asian countries? Sarvastivadin tradition of translation. What was the status of translation work in Asian regions other than China? Tibetan-Mongolian translation tradition and the Korean-Japanese translation tradition, and how did all this enrich the universal landscape of translation? 6.1 Introduction. In Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit traditions, the meaning of translation is to say again what has been said. To repeat something, to say the same thing again and again, several times comes within the ambit of translation. While explaining something, repeating or expressing it in many words, in many ways is translation. Clarifying something with the help of repetition, explanation, illustration etc. is also called translation. Translation of English language is synonymous with anuvada in Hindi, but if we look at the arrangement of words, then this meaning is slightly different from the basic nature of English. It has become stereotyped in the sense of repeating the text of one language in another language. 6.2 Translation in an ancient Asian context. In the context of the history of ancient literature, the word anuvada, in its original meaning, has been used in the context of the Vedas. Many hymns of Rigveda have been included in Samveda by making them lyrical. This translation work belongs to the initial period of dialects or languages of the Vedas. A glimpse of the rituals of yajna expressed in the Yajurveda is found in the Brahmin texts. This can also be expressed by the word anuvada. We find the first use of anuvada in the sense of translation in Buddhist literature. The credit for this goes to the nature of Gautam Buddha's teachings. Buddha did not confine his teachings to the boundaries of any caste, clan, region, race and gender. As a result, the spread and expansion of his teachings became unhindered. An incident described in Chullavag is noteworthy in this regard. It becomes clear from this incident that how Gautam Buddha and his disciples made a unique contribution in the direction of translation and published it on the world horizon. In the early days of the Buddhist Sangha, when Gautam Buddha was preaching his teachings in the Magadha region, modern Bihar, two Brahmin Parivrajkas from the far northwest country, now in Pakistan, came to Magadha and entered Gautam Buddha's Sangha. Their names were Yamelu and Tekul. He was very disturbed to see that his disciples were propagating the sublime teachings of Mahatma Buddha by reciting them in the vernaculars. He prayed to Mahatma Buddha to allow him to translate the sublime teachings of the Buddha into Chandas, the language or dialect of the Vedas. Gautam Buddha disallowed to do so and said, "Because I allow you to learn and understand the words of the Buddha by adapting them to your own language or dialect." Chulavaga's Pali text Anujanami, Vikav. Sakaya Nirutiya Buddhavakanam Pariyapunitam. This means that Mahatma Buddha forbade his disciples to do his teachings in a language or dialect that was not popular at that time and had become difficult to understand. On the contrary, he allowed his disciples to learn and understand by translating it into their own language or dialect. This decision of Buddha created a revolution in the direction of translation or translation, and a process of translating Buddha's teachings into many languages and dialects took place. Resultantly, with the passing of a few centuries, Buddha's words became available in many languages of Asia. The contribution of the first two disciples of Gautam Buddha is very important in the Asian tradition of translation. Both these disciples, Tapas and Bhalika, were traders. were on their way from Atkala, modern Orissa, to Afghanistan in connection with their business. Buddha was at Uruvela, near Gaya, at that time immediately after attaining Bodhi. They talked to him, accepted his discipleship, offered food to him and set out on their way of business. The Tripitaka is silent as to the language or dialect in which they spoke and the languages or dialects used for trade in Afghanistan, or whether they kept translators with them. Wherever he would have introduced the words of Mahatma Buddha, he must have used some local languages and dialects too. Here, since the Buddhist texts are silent in this regard, it is difficult to elaborate on this subject. Here the contribution of Mahakachayang is equally important as that of Yamal Tekul and Tapas Bhalika among others. He was born in Ujjain and was the son of the royal priest of King Chanda Pradyot. After entering the Sangha, Mahatma Buddha had sent him to propagate dharma in the country of Avanti. He skillfully translated Buddha's words available in the languages of Magadha Koshala countries into the language of Avanti country and disseminated them to the masses. Here it is clear that Gautam Buddha was aware that except Bhikkhu Mahakachayana no one could do this work. Because Mahakachayana was knowledgeable in the languages of Magadha Koshala and a Pandit in the language of Avanti country. The second specialty of Mahakachayana was that he was able to explain in detail the words of Mahatma Buddha, which were said in brief or aphoristic form, piece by piece. Similarly, the story of Bhikkhu Purna in Sanskrit, can also be counted as a milestone in translation science. He was the son of a Gahapti, Vaishya, of Saparak Nagar of Sunaprant Desh, today's northwest Maharashtra and southwest Gujarat. When he grew up, he went to Savatthi, Shravasti, with a caravan. There he became a monk after listening to the teachings of Mahatma Buddha. Mahatma Buddha had preached the Punnavada Sutta aiming at them. After returning, he successfully preached dharma and got fame. His soft-spokenness was his specialty. He used to speak sweet words even after listening to the harsh and angry words of the people. This is the reason why he succeeded as a preacher, Upipavdatal, in the Sunaprant country, while the people of the Sunaparan country are said to be loud, cruel and harsh. The Asalasanana Sutta of Majjhima Nikaya shows that the society in Kamboja or Kamboja country, northwest part of modern Afghanistan, had only two classes: Arya, owner, and Dasa, slave. The Buddha appears to have had a good knowledge of the Kamboja society. From which source this knowledge would have come, it is worth considering. This translation work would have been possible only through the medium of communication. The confidence with which the Buddha speaks of the two classes prevalent there in connection with the denial of the Varna system suggests that there must have been regular movement between northern India, ancient Madhya Mandal, and northwestern Afghanistan. After the demise, Mahaparinirvana, of Gautam Buddha, the first council of Buddhists took place at Rajagreh, modern Rajgir. 500 Buddhist saints, Arhant, were gathered in it. It can be inferred that members from different regions must have conducted the Sangiti, Great Conference, with the help of translation. In the era of Alexander Darius Chandragupta, there were many attacks on Iran and India by the rulers of Greece. Alexander captured Iran by defeating the huge army of Darius and similarly defeated many rulers of Gandhar Bactria region. In course of time, his chief commander Seleucus had also won over these places. Indian and Greek sources suggest that the treaty between Seleucus and Chandragupta Maurya led to an exchange of conquered territories. Now the question arises that what was the medium of communication in that era? It seems that there must have been a large number of interpreters who would have conveyed the words of one region to other regions. During the reign of Chandragupta Maurya, Greek ambassador Megasthenes was sent to Pataliputra. The information he had collected through Indica gives an impression of the immediate arrangement of translation. In addition to political activities and through the expansion of communication, religious and cultural activities were also very fast. The Second Buddhist Council was held at Vaishali in the beginning of the 4th century BCE. It was attended by 700 Thera Bhikkhus, senior Buddhist monks. They were from all the regions where Buddhism had reached and there was a lot was known about them. Although it is told that The Sangiti was conducted in Magadhi, Pali language, only, but it was a meeting point of the respective languages and dialects of representatives from distant countries too. It is clear that all this work was done through the translation team of the Buddhists. After this, in the 3rd century BCE, the translation work progressed very rapidly. In the middle of the century, when Emperor Ashoka showed his interest in the propagation of Buddhism, according to the Dipavamsa and the Mahavamsa, the 3rd Buddhist council was called under his patronage, which was attended by 1,000 senior bhikkhus. In this concert, Buddha's speech was recited and compiled for the 3rd time. This concert took place in Pataliputra's Ashokaram, Buddhist hermitage, in which the final form was given to the compilation of Buddha's words. This council influenced translation work in a big way. After the council, missionaries were sent to many areas. Such missionaries were sent to those areas who were familiar with the local languages and dialects. Emperor Ashoka sent his emissaries from region to region for the purpose of administration, who were familiar with the local languages. He adopted the same policy in promoting his message by inscribing his message on stone. His messages were in various languages and dialects, as is often the case everywhere in the government system. The draft of any government decree, order, ordinance, is prepared in the approved official language. Later, as per the need, various languages and dialects are used for publicity or communication from place to place, so that it can reach as many people as possible. It is a question that whether the translation work was done on an individual basis or whether translators were commissioned for it, as it happened in the context of Chinese and Tibetan rulers in later periods. It is difficult to say anything about this, because no evidence of that era is available today. 6.3 Translation work in Asian countries. In fact, during the reign of Emperor Ashoka, many delegations were sent to many countries for the propagation of Dharma. They did their work very well, but the most important among them was the delegation sent to Sinhala, today's Sri Lanka, under the leadership of Bhadanta Mahinda. The 4 other bhikkhus who went with him are Ittithaya, Uttiya, Sambal and Bhaddasal. Soon after this bhikkhu delegation, another delegation went to Sinhala. That was a delegation of bhikkhunis, Buddhist nuns. Its chief was Bhikkhuni Sanghamitra. Both the delegations went to Sri Lanka by sea via Utkal. Evidences from ancient history agree that Utkala and Sri Lanka were on the trade route and there was a lot of traffic between the two countries. Here the context of Utkal is also important because it made the origin of the language or dialect of the Pali Tripitaka available today. Many scholars have identified many other places, in which the main ones are Magadha, Koshala, Avanti, Vidisha region in Madhya Pradesh, Girnar region of Gujarat etc. Here the decision on the origin of the language dialect of Tripitaka is also important because on the same basis the next Sagayana, recitation and compilation, took place in 2928 BCA during the reign of King Vattagamini Abhay in Sri Lanka. In that council, which the Theravada Buddhist tradition considers the 4th council, the entire Buddha's word, Tripitaka, was inscribed on stone tablets. This was the first event in the religious history of India, when a scripture or scriptures were written down. This entire Tripitaka was translated into Sinhalese for the propagation of Dharma in Sri Lanka. In that series of translation, the whole group of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis from India was involved. Bhadanta Mahinda was the head of those groups. Here the question arises that from where did those delegations get good Sinhalese language experts, who also have good grasp of Pali language? The answer is that since there were Utkali, Oriya, people in Bhadanta Mahinda's party, there was no problem, because they were associated with Utkali business organizations, which had established relations with Sri Lanka. As a result, the propagation of Buddhism took place very fast. Royal patronage must have also been helpful behind this. The third important work that took place under the supervision of Bhadanta Mahinda was the creation of Atakathas, explanatory commentaries on the texts of Tripitaka, in Sinhalese language. Buddhist legend has it that delegations of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis going to Sri Lanka took with them the entire Pali Atthakatha literature, c. Samantapasadika's Bahirnidanvana, to Sri Lanka, the Sinhalese Atakathas being a translated text of the same Pali Atakathas. From a logical point of view, this tradition is very weak, because there is so much difference between the language style of the Tripitaka and the language style of the Atakathas. The premise that both are creations of the same period cannot be accepted. Secondly, just as the entire Tripitaka was taken orally to Sri Lanka, so according to Buddhist tradition, the Pali Atakathas were also carried forward. If this is a fact, then the Sinhalese Atakathas were not original works but were Sinhalese translations of the Pali Atakathas. The fact that the Pali Atakathas were taken to Sri Lanka is also rejected because there is no mention of the Pali Atakathas being written in the Buddhist council in which the Tripitaka was written for the first time, organized during the time of the Sri Lanka king Vattagamini Abhe. Acharya Buddhaghosa, the great composer of Atakathas of the 4th-5th century such as Sumangala Vilasini, Papancha Sudani, Sarathapakasini, Manorath Purni, Atikathas of Digha Nikaya, Madhyama Nikaya, Sayukta Nikaya in Anguttar Nikaya, and other Atikathas, that Acharya Buddhaghosa either translated Maha-Athikatha, Mahapacharyari or Mahapa, Kurundi or Kurundiya, and the Thikatha, Sankhyapat Katha, Agamata Katha, Acharyanan Samanatta Katha and other ancient Sinhalese Atakathas into Pali or used them in his own Atakathas after taking a lot of material from them. From this it becomes clear that the Sinhalese Atikathas must have existed during the time of Acharya Buddhadatta, Acharya Buddhaghosa and Acharya Dhammapala. If this is a fact, then their translation in Pali language by the above-mentioned Acharyas is also a historical fact. Acharya Buddhaghosa's senior and junior contemporaries have been Acharya Buddhadatta and Acharya Dhammapala. He also wrote several Atakathas and thus carried forward the translation tradition of Pali literature by writing Pali Atakathas as translations from Sinhala Atakathas. The 8 stories translated by Buddhadatta were Uttar Vinichaya, Vinaya Vinichaya, Abhidhamavtara, Ruprupvibhaga and Madhurat Vilasini. On the other hand, Paramathai-pani, Netipkaran Athikatha, prominent in Athakata literature, famous by the name of Acharya Dhammapala. Other books, famous by his name, are just commentaries. They cannot be kept in the category of Atakathas, and for this reason they are not remarkable even in the context of translation. Work, Sarvastivadin tradition of translation. While discussing the Theravada tradition of translation, we go back to the 5th-6th centuries CE, but probably the most important tradition of Sarvastivadins from the point of view of translation work is during this age. This tradition usually starts from the 1st or 2nd century CE. In that tradition, the period of Emperor Kanishka is very important. In the same period, Vibhasha Sangiti was called, which is presented by historians as the 4th Sangiti. A commentary on the Abhidharma episode, Aryagyan Prasthan Shastra, of Arya Katyaniputra was prepared in this council called for the Sangayan of the Agama texts of Sarvastivada, which brought a new turn in the history of Buddhism. 2 sects by the name of Vabhushik and Sautratak arose and their huge discourse was also prepared. This discourse spread to many countries of Central Asia, through Kashmir and Punjab. These texts were translated into many languages of Central Asia: Kashmiri, Pashto, Dardi, Tocharian, Persian, Sogdian etc. During the time of Emperor Kanishka, the Abhidharmakosha commentary written by Acharya Vasubandhu was translated into many languages of Central Asia, and so were the Vinaya Pitaka. Buddhist ethics. These texts reached China via Central Asia. The Vinaya texts of Sarvastivadins were so widely publicized that even in areas like Tibet, Mongolia etc., where Mahayana Buddhism prevailed, Sarvastivadi Vinaya was also recognized. F.A. Xian, the first of the famous Chinese travelers, had come to India with the sole purpose of settling disputed issues by comparing them with the original Vinaya texts in India. 6.4 Translation work in China. Although in the previous unit there has been enough discussion on the Chinese translation of Buddhist literature, but here it is necessary to briefly discuss the entry of Buddhism in China and the preparation of a huge translated literature as a result of it. It is known from Chinese sources that Indian Buddhist bhikkhus came to Shenxi, the then capital of China, for evangelization, had reached in 217 only. BC. In 122 the golden image of Buddha was presented to the emperor there. According to the Chinese description book, this was the first statue presented for worship. In this connection, the Chinese Emperor Ming-ti in 61 or 62 BCE an embassy was sent to India, so that they could take Buddha's words and Bhikkhudal to China for their reading, worship etc. According to the Chinese description text, in this effort, an Indian Bhikkhu Kashyapa Matang from central India went to China and translated the Buddha Sutra text of 42 volumes into Chinese. He died in the famous city of China, Luoyang. Buddhism gradually took root in China and spread widely between the 4th and 7th centuries. This is the period when Chinese Buddhist scholars Fa Jian, Yuan Chang, Itzing etc., and Indian scholars mainly Kumrajiva, Bodhidharma and Paramartha translated many Indian Buddhist texts into Chinese. The number of Chinese Buddhists increased. As a result, the sectarianism prevalent in Buddhism also spread there. Not only did the representative Indian Buddhist sect flourish there, new sects also arose on the land there, whose own original texts and translated texts came to light in large numbers. The texts of the great philosopher Nagarjuna are notable among the texts translated into Chinese. Nagarjuna's biography is also available in Chinese, which was translated by the great translator Kumrajiva. This is the same Nagarjuna whom the scholar Chinese traveler Yuan Chang called one of the 4 sons that enlightened the world. 20 texts available in the Chinese translation series are attributed to Nagarjuna. This is also proved by the catalogue of the Buddhist treatises prepared by the famous Japanese scholar Bunyo Nanjiyo. Nagarjuna's great philosophical treatise, Madhyamika Shastra and Salkha are noteworthy in those texts. 6.5 The great translator Kumrajiva. Kumrajiva, Chumo Loshi in Chinese, the biographer of the great philosopher Nagarjuna, was himself a great philosopher. His name shines like the sun in the field of translation. He has been amongst the greatest translators of the world. His biography is the great link connecting India, Central Asia and China. His father, Kumarayan, was from Central India, mother from Kucha Desh in the region of Central Asia. Kumrajiva himself had done great service to Buddhism and philosophy by living in China. According to Chinese chronicles, in the year 405 CE, the king of the Sin dynasty organized a festival in honor of Kumrajiva and the completion of 9 years of his residence in Chang, and to form a translation board, in which 800 monks and scholars were included, and he was entrusted with the task of translating Indian Buddhist texts into Chinese. The Maharaja himself showed interest in that translation campaign, and the Chinese translation of 300 Buddhist texts was completed under the supervision of Kumrajiva. The great translator Kumrajiva remained engaged in translation work till the last moment of his life, CE 413, with the same enthusiasm as he had done in the beginning. As a result, due to his preaching, many Buddhist viharas were established in North China and 90% of the population there got initiated into Buddhism. Notable are the books translated by him. 1. Mahaprajnapamita Shastra, Chinese name Ta-Ch, Tulung, Bunyo Nanjiyo. Catalogue, No 1169. 2. Shat Shastra, Pailung, No 1188. 3. Sukhavatyaamritvyu, 4 Shvoo Me Tu Chin, number 200. 4. Saddhanpundrika Sutra, Miao Pfa Lion Havachin, number 134. 5. Mahaprajnaparamita Sutra, Moho Panjo Piolo Mi Chin, number 3. 6. Vajrachedika Prajnaparamita Shutra, Chin Can Panjo Piolo Mi Chin, number 10. Kumrajiva's life was full of variations. He expanded Indian culture in Central Asia and China through his relations and works, cementing its roots in such a way that till today there is no shortage in it. 6.6 The great translator Parmarth, CE 503 to 569. Parmarth was a Sramana, Bhikkhu, of Ujjain. After completing the elementary education of Buddhist philosophy, he went to North India and started living in Pataliputra. At the same time, a delegation of the Emperor of China came to Magadha, and demanded from the local king such a skilled Buddhist scholar who could go to China and spread the philosophy of Buddhism. Bhikkhu Paramartha reached Nanking in 548 CE by sea with many Buddhist texts. According to the wishes of the Chinese emperor, he started translating Indian Buddhist texts into Chinese. He did this for 10 consecutive years. After that, due to the deterioration of the political situation, he had to wander from place to place. He died at the age of 71. By the time of his death, he had completed the Chinese translation of about 70 Buddhist texts. Paramartha's translation work can be divided into two sections. The first section is dated to 548 to 557 CE, in which he translated 10 texts into Chinese, which were found in existence till around 730 CE, after which they disappeared. The second volume is from 557 to 569 CE, which was spent under the patronage of the Ha dynasty. His greatest translation work was the Chinese translation of the Mahayana Samparigraha Shastra, and a Buddhist sect arose there in its name. The main texts translated into Chinese by Bhikkhu Paramartha are 1. Sandhi Vimochana Sutra, Banyo Nanjiyo Catalogue, number 151. 2. Vajrachidaka Prajnaparamita Sutra, number 10. 3. Mahayana Samparigraha Shastra, No 1183. 4. Madhyanta Bhag Shastra, No 1248. 5. Abhidharmakosha Vyakhya Shastra, No 1269. 6. Mahayana Samparigraha Shastra Interpretation, No 1171. 2. 7. Vinayada Vinshati Prasannarth Shastra, No 1139. 8. Ashtashakash, or Ashtasha Shunyata Shastra, number 1187. 6.7 The great translator Bodhidharma, or Dharmabodhi. Bodhidharma was a hermit, bhikkhu, from South India. In 526 CE he left for China. There in Nanking, Maharaja Liang Wuti of South China welcomed him with full respect. Bodhidharma established the path of meditation there. He did the Chinese translation of the same text called Mahaparinirvana Sutra Shastra. The Dhyan sect, founded by Bodhidharma, had its influence on Japan. That sect became Zen there. 6.8 The great translator Shanzang, CE 602 to 664. Shanzang was a hermit from Luoyang in the Honan region, who received the Upashampada, Minghood, in Chengdu in 622 CE. He was patronized by the Eastern Xin dynasty. Shanzang became a very famous scholar of China in the writing of texts related to history and as a translator of Sanskrit Prakrit texts. He translated 75 texts into Chinese during his tenure, which is spread over 1,335 volumes. Shanzang left for India in 629 CE and returned to China in 645 CE. Almost the next 20 years of his life was spent in translation work, completing the Chinese translation of some of the texts he had brought with him. Among them, sect-wise description of some major texts is as follows. 1. Mahayana, Ta Shanpu, 416 texts. 2. Theravada, Shangsupu, 14 texts. 3. Sammitya, Sanmitipu, 15 texts. 4. Mahishasik, Mishasipu, 22 texts. 5. Kashyapya, Kinshi Payepu, 17 texts. 6. Dharmagupta, F.A. Mipu, 42 texts. 7. Sarvastivada, Shwo Iseyupu, 67 texts. 8. Mahasanghik, T. Shungpu, 15 texts. 9. Ethology, Yin-lung, 36 texts. 10. Vocabulary, Shen-lung, 13 texts. The said 657 books were taken by Shanzang from India to China by loading them on 22 horses. According to the historians of Chinese language and literature, some Sanskrit scholars also cooperated in the translation work of Shanzang. The Chinese bhikkhus were certainly involved in it by the order of the king. This is the reason that under the supervision of Shanzang, the vast discourse could be translated into Chinese. Prominent among the texts translated by Shanzang and his disciples are as follows. 1. Mahaprajnaparamita Sutra, Banyo Nanjiyo Catalogue. Number 1. 2. Vidyamatra Siddhi Tradasha Shastra, No 1215. 3. Karmasiddha Prakaran Shastra, circa 1221. 4. Vidyamatra Siddhi Shastra, No 1240. 5. Madhyant Vibhag Shastra, Note 1244. 6. Mahayansamparigra Shastramul, Note 1247. 7. Abhidharma Nyayanusara Shastra, Note 1265. 8. Hetuvidya Nyayapravesh Shastra, Note 1216. 9. Nyayadavaratrika Shastra, Note 1224. 10. Vajrachidika Prajnaparamita Sutra, Circa 13. 6.9 The Great Translator Bodhiruchi, CE 571 to 627. Bodhiruchi went to China from South India. His Sangha name was Dharmaruchi. The Empress of China, Wu Sotian, CE 684,705, changed her name to Bodhiruchi. Vedanta Bodhiruchi is said to have lived to the age of 156 and translated 53 texts into Chinese, spread over 111 volumes. The main texts translated by Vedanta Bodhiruchi are 1. Mahaprajnaparamita Banyo Nanjiyo Catalogue, number 18. 2. Maharatnakuta Sutra, number 23. 3. Amitayush View, number 23, 5. 4. Samantamukparivat, number 23, 10. 5. Vinay Vinishcha Upali Paripircha, number 23, 24. 6. Metroya Prapircha, no. 23, 42. 7. Mahayanvajrachuramani Bodhisattvacharya Varga Sutra, number 86. 8. Ratnamegha Sutra, number 151. 9. Mahayana Sutras, number 241. 10. Manjushri Ratnagarbhadharani Sutra, number 448. Apart from Vedanta Bodhiruchi, there were many other famous Chinese and Indian teachers who were engaged in the translation work of Chinese language and translated many Sanskrit, Pali Prakrit texts into Chinese. 6.10 Tibeto-Mongolian translation tradition. This process of translation went on continuously. Apart from China, the translation venture also made a successful debut in other countries of Asia. The names of countries like Tibet, Mongolia, Korea, Japan etc. should be taken with respect in this direction. This great work was initiated in Tibet by Gurubhai Thonmi Sambhote, a contemporary of Shanzang. Thonmi Sambhota was a classmate of Shanzang at Nalanda Mahavihara. Before coming to India, Thonmi Sambhot was a minister in the court of the king in his country Tibet. The king sent him to India so that he could return from here after learning the language, grammar and script and start the translation work in Tibetan language. The king of Tibet got its inspiration from his Chinese wife. The translation work started after Thonmi Sambho returned to Tibet. The king was so impressed by the translation work that he converted to Buddhism and declared Buddhism to be the state religion of Tibet. After that, many translators were trained, in which Acharya Shantarikshita, head of Vikramshila University, Dipankar Shrigya, Atish, etc. can be named. In this sequence, Tibetan translation of many texts of Sanskrit Pali Prakrit was prepared. The compilation of these translated texts was done through a logical and scientific method. For example, all the translated texts containing sermons of Buddha were put under Kangya. It is also characteristic of Tibetan translation that irreligious, secular texts were also included in the translated texts, while nothing like this happened in the Chinese translation tradition. For example, the Tangier collection includes the translation of Kavya Prakash, a famous text of literature, and Meghdut of Kalidas. Another feature that comes to light when comparing the Chinese translation and the Tibetan translation is the metaphrasing translation method of the Tibetan translation. Note that the paraphrasing translation method has been more dominant in Chinese translation. Shortly after the translation work in Tibetan language started, a period came in which Tibetan Buddhism began to influence the neighboring countries. Sikkim, which is part of India today, Bhutan, Mongolia etc. are some of them. In these, the entry of Buddhism in Bhutan etc. is not as important as in Mongolia, because the Tibetan translation in Mongolia was adapted into Mongolian language, while there was no need to do so in Bhutan and others. 6.11 Korean-Japanese translation tradition. Another experiment took place with the Chinese translation of Indian texts. Korean and Japanese versions of those translated texts also took place. This work went on for centuries. This use refers to the translation of the translated text, while the Translated Chinese scriptures hold the same place in Korean Buddhism and Japanese Buddhism as the Theravada Pali Tripitaka in Theravada countries. Buddhist sects emerged in countries like Mongolia, Korea, Japan, North Vietnam, etc., and then translated, adapted and original texts in languages and dialects also came to light, but they could not expel Chinese translated texts till date. It means that in countries like Mongolia and Bhutan, Kangya and Tangia have the same recognition as they. Translated Chinese Buddhist texts in Korea, Japan, North Vietnam etc. 6.12 Translated stories. In this context, the matter of translation of fiction has been left out till now, while that too is as important as the others. Translated fiction has made a great contribution in the expansion of Indian culture and literature. It made an impression of Indian literature on the whole world. This process of translation begins with the translation of the Jatak tales. A main part of Buddhist literature is Jatak. The practice of presenting interesting stories in verse and prose is very old. It is said that Bhikkhu Mahinda and his 4 companions went to Sri Lanka not only with the Tripitaka, but also with Atthakathas written in Pali. Buddhism was propagated among the Sinhalese people by converting those epics into Sinhalese language and script. In course of time, the translated Sinhalese Atthakathas got lost, and later on in the 5th-6th centuries they were retransformed into Pali by Acharya Buddhadatta, Buddhaghosa and Dhammapala. In the course of time, the Jatak stories were adapted into Sanskrit as well as into Prakrit. Story collections in Sanskrit came to light under many names. The oldest collection is the Brihatkatha, which is said to be the work of Gunadhya. It is said that the Brihatkatha is lost. Later on, the compilation of popular stories in the society, which came to light, was named Kathasaritsagar. After this came the period of Panchtantra. The stories of Kathasaritsagar, Panchtantra etc. got translated in the same way and went abroad. For example, when the story of the 2 bulls, Karatak and Damanak, of the Panchtantra reached Arabic, the names Karatak Damanak became Kalila Damna. Similar changes must have happened in other stories as well. Stories of Aesop, Arabian Nights, etc. have been originated from the story collections of our country. 6.13 Translated Persian Arabic literature. Our relations with Central Asia and West Asia are very old. Rather, it would not be an exaggeration to say from prehistoric times. No systematic history of this has been prepared. We have to make our point on the basis of scattered information only. In fact, it can be inferred from the little literature available on the translation of story collections that the relationship has been strong through translation. Christian sources reveal that Christian missionaries had arrived on the western coast of India by way of the trade route. As early as the 1st century CE, they used regional dialects for religious propagation and translated scriptures into them. Today, in the absence of evidence, it is difficult to say clearly which books were brought under the ambit of translation. The same thing happened with the rise of Islam. Within a short time after the advent of Islam, Islamic literature had reached the western shores through trade. Later that literature was translated and made available to the people. In the Middle Ages, when Persian became the official language of the Muslim rulers, translations from Indian languages into Persian and from Persian into Indian languages began to take place in a systematic manner. Study and translation work was done in sufficient quantity through the famous scholar Al-Biruni. Even Emperor Akbar had set up translation bureaus for the translation of Hindu religious texts like Ramayana Mahabharata, in which he himself got the translation work done under his supervision. Literature creation has also happened in sufficient quantity. During the reign of Emperor Shah Jahan, Prince Dara Shikoh took great interest in translation work in Sanskrit texts. Especially the Upanishads were translated into Persian. Other translators also did this work, but unfortunately all of them could not be translated into regional languages. One reason for this was also that most of the writers and linguists of the Middle Ages did not even like to meet the common people. That is why the divergence had increased. 6.14 Translation in modern times. After the Industrial Revolution, the attention of European scholars was on the language, culture, art and literature of Asian countries. They not only did translation work, but also invented new methods of translation. Asian scholars used these genres in the context of Asian languages. Indian, Chinese, Iranian, Arabic, Central Asian scholars started translation work from many languages and made substantial progress in this direction. Immediately after India's independence in 1950, a conference of heads of state of Asian countries was held in New Delhi under the leadership of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. That conference gave a wonderful impetus to translation work among the countries of Asia. As a result, translation of ancient Indian scriptures also started in some languages of Asia. For example, Ramayana, Mahabharata were translated into Chinese language. Rabindranath Tagore's visits to China also gave impetus to the translation work. The remains of the great translator Shanzang were brought to India and enshrined in Nalanda. A building was built in his name and translation work began. Quran Sharif, the original scripture of the followers of Islam, was translated into almost all the major languages of India. The Pali Tripitaka has been translated into some languages of India and this work is still going on. It is an impossible task to describe the ongoing process of translation of administrative, state records etc. Therefore, taking a panoramic survey of the entire translation work, it seems that the next centuries will gallop on the trains of translation. This description of the Asian translation tradition is introductory. It is not complete, it is only a unit. Information scattered at different places has been collected and given a form of text. 6.15 Summary. We find the ancient use of language replacement in the sense of language change. In Buddhist literature, Gautam Buddha inspired his disciples to learn and understand the words of knowledge by translating them into their own language or dialect. This decision created a revolution in translation. Perhaps this is the reason that within a short time, Buddha's words became available in many languages of Asia. Tapas Bhallika and Mahakachana, the chief disciples of the Buddha, are important contributors to the tradition of translation. Mahakachayana was knowledgeable in the languages of Magadha Koshala and a scholar of the language of Avanti country. He was also skilled in explaining in detail the words of Buddha said in the sutras. Bhikkhu Punna is an unforgettable name in this direction. The Punnavada Sutta was preached by the Buddha aiming at them only. Due to the treaty between Seleucus and Chandragupta Maurya, the medium of exchange in the conquered areas must have been translation. Emperor Ashoka had sent many delegations to many countries. Translation must have been the basis of their methodology. It is clear from the evidences of Attacatas of Acharya Buddhaghosa, the great Attakatha of the 4th-5th century, that he either translated many ancient Sinhalese Attakatas into Pali or took material from them and used them in his Attakatas. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.